Welcome to Notorious Minds. If this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to this channel. Please remember to click the notification bell. In this way, you will be notified the next time I upload a new video. This is the final conclusion of Ted Bundy's life. As law enforcement connects the dots, they finally realize they were dealing with a cunning serial offender who has evaded justice. The hunt for one of America's most notorious criminals reaches its climax, revealing shocking details about Bundy's reign of terror and the disturbing truths about the human psyche.
Bundy has now started his killing spree. As victims increase, authorities in Washington state are starting to see that they may have a serial offender. But the prolific killer is not finished. He makes his way to the University of Washington with a briefcase and crutches. His next victim would be Georgianne Hawkins was born on August 20, 1955 in Pierce County, Tacoma, Washington. Georgianne was a wiggle-worm and is well documented in report cards that grade school teachers sent home to her mom and dad. The little girl loves to talk. Her mother, Edie, said about her, "I used to wait for the report card that didn't have a note in it." Edie said with a laugh, "There weren't many of those." She was popular, but she was not the kind of person who stuck to one group or clique. She had friends of every kind. She was a very self-confident little girl, not vain, arrogant, or snooty. That's why kids liked her. Her friends called her George. When she was in the brownies, like a fish to water, she learned how to swim. In a small box of belongings in AAU swimming medal, she swam competitively for quite a while until she found her new love, which was boys. Georgianne graduated Lake High School in 1973. She had an older sister named Patty, who was 5 years older. Patty attended Central Washington 2 or 3 hours away. Georgianne's mother wanted her youngest daughter closer and suggested that she attend University of Washington in Seattle, about 30 miles from home. Mom and Dad paid for tuition, books, room and board. Georgianne worked all summer to pay for everything else, which was mainly pizza and fun. She was a member of the sorority known as the Kappa Alpha Theta. Then, in the early hours of June 11, 1974, Georgianne Hawkins was headed to her sorority house to study for a Spanish final. She stopped by her boyfriend's dorm to talk to him until 1 a.m. Continuing down a brightly lit alley, she never made it to her sorority house, and Ted Bundy was walking in the same alley. Ted was walking on some crutches and carrying a briefcase at this time. He saw Georgianne at the other end of the alley, and he would take a few steps on the crutches and then stop. He would take a few more steps and stop again, trying to gain sympathy from Georgianne. By this time, he and Georgianne are face to face in the middle of the alley. He then asked Georgianne for assistance carrying the briefcase, and she agreed to help him. They walked in a little ways until he got her to a dark parking lot by the university. She bent over towards the car to put the briefcase in his car. Not suspecting a thing, he grabbed a crowbar and proceeded to bash her over the head. Ted hit her so hard that one of her shoes came off and her earrings flew out of her ears. Georgianne never saw him raising his arm to hit her. Bundy then grabbed some handcuffs. He handcuffed George and threw her into the passenger side of his car. Ted said that he had his passenger seat missing from his vehicle so that he could lay his victim down, out of sight from other traffic passing by. He drove to a grassy area about 20 minutes from the university. She regained consciousness in the car and started screaming and crying. She was probably begging for her life. He pulls her out of the car and drags her into the woods. Once in the deep part of the Seattle forest, he raped Hawkins many times. She was both conscious and unconscious based on the amount of time Ted spent with her. He basically tortured and beat her. Ted Bundy said he had 6 hours with Georgianne Hawkins. And so you can just about imagine what he did to her in those 6 hours. He indicated that he killed her when the sun was coming up. He knocked her unconscious and then strangled her to death with an old piece of rope. He dragged her further into the woods and decapitated her. And right before she vanished, sexual intercourse with her corpse. He repeatedly came back to the body for this reason until the corpse was either so decomposed that it was impossible to have intercourse, or an animal had fed on the body, rendering it impossible to have intercourse. When investigators found Georgianne's remains, and her jawline was broken. As he drove from the murder scene, Ted threw evidence out the window of his car. One of the many ways that Bundy used to get rid of evidence. If he did not throw it out the window of his car, he would bury it or burn it. Her roommate became very concerned when the time was 2 a.m. and she did not return to the sorority house. She called George's boyfriend, who said that she had left his house at about 1 o'clock a.m. Her mother, Edie, got a telephone call from her sorority sister asking if Georgianne was there because she hadn't returned to the sorority house. Her mother said no. That's when she knew her daughter was missing. The father of a sorority sister was a newsman, which pushed the story onto the front pages of newspapers and the top of TV broadcasts more quickly. Her remains were found in Issaquah, Washington on September of 1974. She was only 18 years old. Unfortunately, Georgianne's remains were accidentally cremated by the coroner's office along with those of an unidentified person. Ted Bundy was not charged with the murder of Georgianne Hawkins because of the insufficient evidence, seeing that they destroyed it, but he admitted to the crime shortly before his death. Then one day in July in Kent County, Ted made his way to Lake Sammamish State Park in his Notorious Volkswagen, dressed in all white. Janice Blackburn Ott was born on February 14, 1951 in Oregon. She married on December 28, 1971 to James Ott and was working as a probation caseworker at Kent County Juvenile Court. She was 23 years old. On July 14, 1974, she left home in Issaquah to ride her yellow 10-speed bike to Lake Sammamish State Park. She was minding her business, getting a tan and relaxing. That was the case until a man named Ted approached her with his arm in a sling and asked her if she could help him tie his boat to his car. Being nice, she agreed to help the man and headed toward the car. She was struck with an iron pipe until she went unconscious. Bundy put her in handcuffs. He then drove an unconscious Ott deep into the woods of Seattle. He raped her countless times and physically beat her. Still alive, he took her and tied her to a tree and gagged her mouth. Ted would never be charged with her murder, but confessed to killing her shortly before his death. Janice's remains were later discovered when two hunters stumbled upon the dump site. When people read about Ott, they might only see her referred to as the Issaquah woman in old newspaper clippings or television stories. Except Janice Ott was not just an Issaquah woman. Born in Oregon, she spent most of her years in Spokane. She attended Finch Elementary School and spent her high school years at Shadow Park High School, where she graduated with high honors. In 1969, Janice was very involved in activities at school, like the yearbook from that year is filled with photos of her, who was referred to as Jan back then. Janice was someone who always trusted people, who would do the right thing. A scholarship fund was started at the school in her honor. This is what Notorious Minds strives to do. Most only remember the killer that committed these diabolical crimes, but we also like to remember the ones that suffered at the hands of these evil predators. Janice was a loving wife and deserves to be remembered not as a body, but a person who died way too soon. Her urn sits inside a glass case at Fairmont Memorial Park in Spokane, Washington. It is still empty. Why? Unbelievably, because King County authorities lost her remains after years of keeping them for evidence. A laminated note from her husband is taped to the corner where he wrote, "You were taken from me, I remember when, leaving me to wonder what might have been." Her parents sued the King County Medical Examiner for $2 million after it lost their daughter's remains. Our next victim's family would do the same. The office had held onto the remains, but they were accidentally cremated when the office moved to Harborview Memorial Center in 1976. Now what makes Bundy even worse is this. Before he killed Janice Ott, he tied her up to a tree and gagged her mouth and went back to Lake Sammamish State Park. He was still not satisfied, attempting to increase his high that he received from these heinous acts. This time, in his reign of terror and developing a sense of invincibility, he committed the unthinkable. He made his way back to the park only 4 hours later and abducted Denise Naslin on the same day. At around 4:00 p.m., he returned to the park. Bundy did confess what happened on that day. When asked about it, he said one of the women would have watched the other one die. He refused to tell investigators the exact location of where they were held. He approached a woman named Cindy and asked her to help him getting his sailboat on top of his car. The 19-year-old was on her way back from the bathroom when a visibly nervous Ted approached her. She immediately asked what happened to his arm, and he told her that he sprained it, but she said no to him. With his arm in a sling, he also asked another woman for help. When she looked into his cold, dark eyes, she firmly told him no. "I'm sorry, I have people waiting for me." Reluctant to accept her answer, he tried a few more times to get her to go. The last time she saw him, he was wandering toward the restrooms. A woman by the name of Patricia Ann Taylor reported a similar encounter with a stranger that matched Ted Bundy's description at about 4:15 p.m. A tall, dark-haired man with his arm in a sling approached her on the way to the concession stand. They chatted briefly, and it didn't take long for him to ask her for a favor. Turner told him that she was in a hurry and wasn't able to help him. Unfortunately, Denise agreed to help Ted. Denise Marie Naslin was born on October 10, 1955. She lived in Seattle, Washington, and she was only 18 years old at the time of her death. She worked in the office setting during the day and was taking a computer programming course at night. Denise and her boyfriend arrived at Lake Sam along with another couple. The couple's name was Bob and Nancy. The small group of friends decided to sit on the lawn on the east side of the park, probably 200 feet from the restrooms. According to Nancy, Denise took 4 Valium tablets when they arrived. At some point in the afternoon, she and her boyfriend got into an argument. Shortly after 4 p.m., Ken and Bob fell asleep after the group had eaten lunch. Denise talked with her friend Nancy and told her that she was feeling kind of high. After a short discussion, she got up and walked towards the bathrooms. It was the last time Nancy ever saw her friend. Denise had driven the friends to the park, and as it got later and later in the day, her lone vehicle stood out in the parking lot. Her boyfriend visibly upset, wondering what happened to the girl he loved. The investigators realized that not one but 2 women had gone missing from Lake Sam on the exact same day, just hours apart. Denise was a very loving and often brought a gift for no special reason to her mother. Her mom said she had that kind of personality. She was helpful by nature that would place her in danger. Witnesses said they saw a young man in a cast late in the afternoon. Police learned that the disappearance, they assumed that both disappearances were connected, and that the disappearances were probably connected to the other women in the area, namely Brenda Ball and Susan Rancourt, who were last seen with a man fitting the same description. After murdering the 2 women, Ted went to see his girlfriend Liz. Complaining that he was starving, they both went to a local joint where they devoured 2 enormous burgers. Absolutely no remorse after murdering 2 women. Ted would confess later that he had absolutely no guilt when it came to the murder of these women. When the remains were found, neither woman's cause of death could be determined. It was not a whole human skeleton, but pieces of bones and skull. Detectives started receiving their first description of an anonymous killer who felt emboldened enough to commit these crimes in broad daylight, whose motives during the day had been observed by hundreds of eyewitnesses, and the first major mistake of his homicidal career. As a result, from personal accounts and observances, it was learned that the potential killer referred to himself stupidly as Ted, that he drove a Volkswagen Beetle and approached a young woman at the park named Nancy Graham at the bandstand area. After he said hello, he introduced himself to her as Ted. He asked the 22-year-old if she would be able to help him load his sailboat on top of his car. However, once the pair reached the vehicle, she quickly noticed that there was no sailboat. It was then that he said it was actually at his parents' house. It was just up the hill. Realizing it was going to be more than just a quick favor, Janice told him that she was unable to help him because she was supposed to meet her husband and parents. But he replied, "Oh, that's okay. I should have told you that it wasn't in the parking lot." He then walked the young woman back to the bandstand area, apologizing one more time, then took off to his right. In broad daylight, Ted Bundy asked both Denise and Janice to assist him unload a sailboat at his parents' house. Bundy had a fake sling and explained that his arm was injured and that he was unable to unload it by himself. So he asked each woman to assist him, and they agreed to go with him. He also claimed that his parents' house was just up the hill, so it wouldn't be too far. Once his victims got into his car, it is likely that he immediately drove them to a secluded dump site in Issaquah known as Tiger Mountain and murdered them there. This is the same site where Ott and Naslin's skeletal remains were found in September of 1974. Later, the published sketches were alarming for Liz, Ted's girlfriend, who couldn't help but notice his familiar jawline and the fact that the murderer was known to drive the same car as Ted. But there was also many discrepancies that made her downplay her suspicions, yet these would only reemerge in months before his departure, when she discovered a hatchet in his car and noticed that he had shaved his hair extremely short, because Ted Bundy had a habit of changing his appearance to throw off investigators. When it comes to the murder of Janice Ott and Denise Naslin, I do not think Janice Ott was alive when Ted Bundy left her. Why? Because Ted Bundy was too detailed when it comes to killing someone, and I don't believe that he would leave a victim alive to potentially get away. But I do believe that Ted Bundy is 100% a narcissist, and he is absolutely a habitual liar. He will want the world to believe that he is a criminal mastermind. So he told investigators that one watched the other die. So I honestly believe that Janice Ott was dead when he first left her. That's just my personal opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments. In 1974, Ted Bundy was working at the Washington State Department of Emergency Services in Olympia by day. He was helping the search for these missing women, but was carrying out the very act his department was trying to solve. Carol Ann Boone, a twice-divorced mother who also worked at the Department of Emergency Management, knew nothing of Ted Bundy's secret life. She just knew that she liked him. "I liked him immediately," she said. "We hit it off well." This is what is documented in a book named The Only Living Witness, the true story of serial sexual killer Ted Bundy. Carol said he struck me as being a rather shy, with a lot more going on under the surface. That's for sure. He certainly was more dignified and restrained than those more certifiable types from the office. Boone formed intense friendship with Ted Bundy, despite both of them being in other relationships. Ted Bundy also admitted to killing a hitchhiker in Boise, Idaho on September 21, 1974. Traveling down to Salt Lake City, the sadistic predator wasted no time satisfying his carnal desires. On August 1974, he received a second acceptance letter at the University of Utah Law School and moved to Salt Lake City, leaving his then-girlfriend Liz in Seattle. And he got into his Volkswagen. He was noticeably absent from his classes for 6 weeks, I wonder why, while he familiarized himself with the local area. He called Liz, but he also dated at least a dozen other women. A woman came forward later that she went on a date with a man, and while they were sitting in the restaurant, the man's eyes turned black as coal, like they were dead, and his face started to contort. Visibly shaken, she had the instinctive feeling that she needed to get out of there, but she wasn't just going to walk out of the restaurant. So she went to the back of the restaurant and she called her older brother and told him to get here now. So her brother came and got her. And then after murders started to take place, the woman was in her living room and they showed a picture of the man they believed was responsible for the murders. The woman dropped to her knees because she became horrifically aware that she was on a date with Ted Bundy. When Theodore Robert Bundy found an apartment in Salt Lake City in September of 1974, he was just another University of Utah law student. As he studied the first year law curriculum a second time, he was devastated to find out that other students had some intellectual capacity he did not. He was not as smart as he thought he was. He found the classes completely incomprehensible. It was a great disappointment to him, but Ted is becoming careless. At this time, he's not really concerned with college. He's just concerned with stalking new victims. Many times Ted stalked his victims before he would kill them. He would even talk to some of them, including his next victim. The initial focus of the Utah killings was one of small towns that lay within the vicinity of Salt Lake City. And on October 2nd, 1974, 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox would be next. Nancy Wilcox was born on July 4th, 1958 in Salt Lake City, Utah, a junior and a cheerleader at Olympus High School in Holiday, Utah. Nancy had a typical teenage argument with her parents about a boy she liked. It was Wednesday night after dinner and her boyfriend John had come to visit her, but her father sent him away. Nancy became angry at her father and stormed out of the house, perhaps hoping to find her boyfriend or maybe just to clear her head. What Nancy did not know is that there was a predator on her block. What usually should have been a quiet neighborhood turned into a nightmare. Nancy never came home that night or ever again. Instead, she became Utah's first known victim of the notorious Ted Bundy. Nancy's disappearance was dismissed by police and downplayed in the media as just another teenage runaway that kept her story from getting the attention it deserved. Ted Bundy had been visiting Nancy's job for a couple of weeks before abducting her. Nancy's friend told authorities that a man that was in college had been visiting her. They remember Nancy say she saw the same man from her work near her house, revealing Ted was stalking her before he took her. Police thought she was a runaway, but her family did not accept that assumption. Ted Bundy saw Wilcox was walking on a poorly lit area when he parked his car and pulled out a knife and pushed her into the orchard. He ties her up and puts her in his vehicle and drives her back to his apartment, where he kept her for 24 hours. Nancy's last moments on earth were terrifying. She was assaulted and beaten all night. He didn't go into detail, and it sounds like he didn't want to. He doesn't reveal how he took her life, but based on his past history, we can probably guess. Eventually, he loaded her corpse back up into his Volkswagen and drives 200 miles. Ted confessed to investigators that her remains were buried near Capitol Reef National Park, some 200 miles south of Holiday, but they were never found. Melissa Ann Smith was born on July 4, 1957 in Utah. She was the daughter of a Midvale chief of police, Lewis Smith. He warned her about the dangers of the world. On October 18, 1974, Melissa was with her friends at a pizza parlor in Midvale, Utah. She left at 9:30 p.m. and began walking home, but she never made it. Melissa's new body was found by a deer hunter on a hillside in Summit Park, Utah, on October 27, 1974. She was raped and sodomized, and her cause of death was believed to have been multiple brain hemorrhage after suffering blows to her head. But one of her stockings was around her neck, suggesting she was strangled as well. Post-mortem examination indicated that she remained alive for up to 7 days following her disappearance. Melissa's case received extensive newspaper coverage before and after she was found, likely because of her connection with the chief of police. She was the second of 5 teenage girls to disappear in the area. All of these cases were believed to be connected to, you know who, Ted Bundy. Bundy confessed to Melissa's rape and murder. He also described rituals he did with the already dead bodies of Melissa and his next victim, Laura Amy, including washing their hair and applying makeup. Laura Ann Amy was born on the 2nd of August 1957 in Lehi, Utah. Laura was staying in numerous places with friends at the time of her murder. On Halloween, October 31st, 1974, Laura was attending a Halloween party. Shortly after midnight and on November 1st, Laura left to go home. She tried to hitchhike and she was never seen again. Laura's new body was found a little over 3 weeks later by hikers in American Fort Canyon, Utah on November 27, 1974. She was raped and sodomized, and her face was beaten beyond all recognition. She was also strangled with her stockings. She was believed to have died the week prior, meaning she was held captive for a long time. Laura was identified through dental records on November 28, 1974. She was the third of 5 teenage girls to disappear in the area. Bundy confessed to Laura's rape and murder. He also described rituals that he did with the already dead bodies of Laura, including washing her hair and applying makeup. Bundy, attempting to change his usual rules of being a handicapped individual, changed and identified himself as a police officer of all things. On the late afternoon of November 8, 1974, Ted Bundy approached 18-year-old telephone operator Carol Durant by a Walden bookstore and Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah. He said, "I'm a police officer and I think somebody's broken into your car. My name is Officer Roseland and of the Murray Police Department." He asked her to go to the car to look at if anything was stolen. She goes with the officer to look to see if anything was missing from her car. She didn't see anything missing. When they get to the rear of the mall, Carol looks inside the car and tells him there's nothing appears to be missing. The officer then tells Carol, "We have a suspect down at the station. Would you accompany me to the station to file a complaint?" So Carol decides to go with Officer Roseland. When she goes with the officer, it's not a police car, but a ratty-looking Volkswagen. She then assumes that maybe he's undercover or off-duty. Carol thinks that she smells alcohol on his breath, but immediately the officer whips out his police badge and shows it to her. Carol, feeling confident that he is a real police officer, decides to get into the car. When Durant pointed out to the officer that he was driving on a road that did not lead to the police station, when Bundy rode his car up on the curb, Carol knew something was wrong, saying, "What are you doing? This is not the way to the police station." He stopped and grabbed her, and they began to fight. He was able to get a handcuff on her left arm, but he couldn't get it on the right one. Again, all of Carol's fingernails were broken during her fight for her life, and Durant was able to open the door of the car and escape. Bundy climbed over the seat and jumped out of the passenger door in his rage-filled pursuit of his victim. But then she sees a car coming toward her. She flags it down and literally jumps into the car and gets away. By the hand of God, Carol escaped her would-be killer. Carol Durant would be the first in a series of mistakes that would finally capture this diabolical predator. Ted Bundy was so enraged that Carol had gotten away that he drives over to a school in Murray. Deborah Jean Kent was born on March 12, 1957 in Bountiful, Utah. Deborah was a 17-year-old student of Viewmont High School in Bountiful. She disappeared after leaving a play production at the school to pick up her little brother. The school's drama teacher and a student told police that a stranger had asked each of them to come out to the parking lot to identify a car. Another student later saw the same man pacing in the rear of the auditorium, and the drama teacher spotted him again shortly before the end of the play. According to witnesses, there was loud screaming coming from the parking lot of the school around the time that Kent was last seen. One person saw a light-colored Volkswagen Beetle speeding away from the school. After her parents realized that she had never left the school, they found a handcuff key sitting by the car. Later, the investigators discovered that the key unlocked the handcuffs removed from Carol Durant's wrist. Bundy eventually confessed to abducting Kent and keeping her at his apartment for a day, stating she was alive during half of it. Debbie was the eldest of 5 Kent children, the mother hen of her siblings. And she was kind and caring and had thought about becoming a social worker after graduation from Viewmont that spring. She was the kind of girl who slipped quarters into strangers' expired parking meters while shopping downtown. "Deb, you're going to go broke doing that," her mother would laugh. But Debbie always seemed to have one more quarter. On the night when she was last seen, Debbie took her parents to a production of The Redhead at her high school. As a member of the school drama club, Debbie had already seen the musical, but wanted her family to enjoy it too. It would be her father's first time out since suffering a massive heart attack. Debbie's 10-year-old brother Blair went skating that night. When the play ran late, it worried Debbie left early to pick up her little brother at the roller skating rink that closed at 10 p.m. Her parents would wait for her to drive back for them. An hour passed. What was taking Debbie so long? Her parents said. The janitor locked up the school auditorium and the Kents decided to walk to a nearby friend's house for a ride home. Her parents walked down the sidewalk and all of a sudden her mother had a terrible feeling. Mrs. Kent recalled, "I was just in a panic. I ran down the sidewalk." She had never made it to the car. At the Bountiful police station that night, the Kents listened in disbelief as they were told that Debbie was probably just another runaway and that no search could be made for 24 hours when Debbie would officially be listed as a missing person. Her parents were insistent Debbie wasn't a runaway and she would never have left her father to wait outside in the cold when he was still so weak. "I don't know how to say it," said Miss Kent, "but that very night I knew she was gone." For the first month after her 17-year-old daughter vanished from Viewmont High's parking lot, Belva Kent slept on the sofa so that she could be near the front picture window overlooking their quiet neighborhood street. Over and over again, she would dream that somebody had driven by and dumped Debbie's body on the frozen front lawn. She would bolt up and peer into the silent night. Debbie was never there. That first month turned into the first year, and then the 5th, and then the 10th. A decade after the November 8, 1974 disappearance of their eldest child, the Kents bought a burial plot. In the 11th year, they put up a headstone. Debbie's 4 siblings grew up, went to college, and started families of their own. Her mother kept her charm bracelet. Her sister wore her graduation gown. Friends sent flowers on her birthday. Now, 14 agonizing years after Deborah Kent was reported missing, the family's nightmare finally ended. Just hours away from the death of serial killer Ted Bundy confessed what the Kents had long suspected, that he had kidnapped Debbie that evening in Bountiful and killed her. On a highway map, Ted Bundy showed investigators the mountains where he said he had buried the pretty teenager and another Utah victim, 16-year-old cheerleader Nancy Wilcock. The only human bone found was a patella, a kneecap, which was assumed to have been Kent's and later given to her family. However, because investigators were unable to get DNA from the remains, they were unable to confirm the identification. The remains were sent to the University of North Texas years later and identified as Deborah Kent's in 2015, finally confirming that she was the victim of Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy brutally attacked Rhonda Stapley in a secluded Salt Lake City, Utah canyon in 1974. She was his second victim in Utah. She miraculously escaped Ted Bundy and hid her dark secret for 3 decades. You see, on October 11, 1974, Rhonda, a Mormon girl, was a senior at the University of Utah. The missing girls in the area were well known, and hitchhiking was no longer popular. Rhonda had just came from a dentist appointment in downtown Utah. While downtown, she decided to go over to a city park and break in her new hiking boots that she had just bought. So she laced the boots up pretty tight. She didn't know it at the time, but the fact that she laced her boots up so tight would aid her later on that night. She had just bought a car but was terrified of driving in Utah traffic. Suddenly, the numbness from her dental surgery started to wear off. It started to get late as well. So she sat down at a bus stop to wait for her bus. The bus never showed up, but a good-looking man in a Volkswagen Beetle did. He pulled up and passed Rhonda slowly, then backed up and rolled down his window and asked, "Where are you going?" Rhonda said to the good-looking stranger, "I'm going to the university." Ted said, "Hop in." So Rhonda opened the door and got in. The first thing that she noticed that the inside passenger door handle was missing, so she was basically trapped. Ted leaned over and pulled the door shut. She said he looked like a college student. He was dressed nice, had a green pullover sweater and slacks on. He didn't look like an outsider or a predator. His demeanor was lighthearted. They just had the normal conversation that strangers would have. She told him, "My name's Rhonda and I'm a pharmacy student. What are you studying?" "My name is Ted. I'm a law student." He drove a couple of blocks, then turned away from the normal route to the university. When she asked him about it, he was very polite and asked her permission, if it would be all right. He had to run an errand up by the zoo, and she told him that would be fine. She didn't care. She thought that it would be faster than if she had waited for the bus. As they were driving, she noticed that they passed the zoo. "I thought you said you were going to the zoo." He said, "No, I said near the zoo." Really, Ted Bundy was just looking for a secluded place to attack his victim. They headed into Haley's Canyon. No alarm bells are going off in Rhonda's head yet. She's just having fun. Then they get to the bottom of that canyon, when he should have turned right to go toward the campus, but instead he turned left and kept driving. And as he's driving, he's kind of looking at parking places and side roads. The conversation started to go weird because he stopped talking. Rhonda is still trying to make idle conversation. She thought that he's probably looking for a place to pull off in the park and wants to make out. But she doesn't know him, and she's not really a make-out kind of girl. But he's still a cute law student, and she didn't want to offend him. So she's trying to think of ways of how to get out of a make-out session. Thinking of, how do I get out of this situation? He pulls in finally to a picnic area that's kind of deserted. He pulls back into the trees a little ways and stops the car and turns it off. And then he turned in his seat so he was almost facing her and leaned in really close. I thought he was going to kiss me, but instead he said, "You know what? I'm going to kill you." And he put his hands on my throat and started squeezing and shaking her. Her first thought was, this has to be some kind of a joke. This guy's got a weirdest sense of humor. But that was just maybe a fraction of a second because she realized he was squeezing too tightly. He was serious and she was in trouble. Rhonda started battling in the car for her life, but she lost consciousness. He dragged her out of the car unconscious to a picnic table in the dead of night. He was slapping her face trying to wake her up. He tore her dental stitches in her mouth, which caused her mouth to bleed. He enjoyed watching her passing out and then waking her up again. By this time, Ted Bundy has her on the ground. He's sitting on her chest, and she wakes up again. She's struggling to breathe because of the weight of his body on her chest. She tells Bundy to get off her chest. "I can't breathe." And he said, "If you stop struggling, I'll let you breathe." He put his hands over her nose and mouth, and she would pass out again. And then he would release her and wake her back up again. Ted Bundy enjoyed the idea of playing God with people's lives, pushing them to the brink of death, and then bringing them back again. He was a psychological terrorist who enjoyed seeing the terror on his victim's face when his victims were at the edge of death. She passed out again. The next time she regained consciousness, she was laying on the ground. The passenger door to the car was open and the dome light was on. It was pitch dark outside, so she could see him. That dome light was the only light in the canyon. She could see him standing over by the car, facing away from her, doing something in the back seat, possibly looking for a weapon to cut her up with, or maybe a shovel. Rhonda didn't die that night. Clearly God had other plans. She just jumped up and ran in the other direction into pitch blackness. Running into trees and branches, she had to get away. She just kept running. As she was running away, her pants were still down at her ankles from her assault. She tripped and she fell downhill in the woods and fell into a mountain river. This river wasn't very deep, but it was a fast, swift-flowing river. There were boulders and tree limbs sticking out. The water swept her away from him, and it saved her life. Those tightly laced hiking boots helped her. Because her hiking boots were laced up so tight, Ted Bundy could not get her pants off of her, and he just ended up pulling them down to her ankles. So when Rhonda was finally able to climb up out that river, she pulled up her pants and hiked home. When Rhonda gets back to her dorm, she was too traumatized. She thought to herself, no one can ever know about the stupid thing she just did, getting into a stranger's car. She was ashamed about what had just happened. She felt that if her mother found out that she had been sexually assaulted, she would have to drop out of school and go home, and that's the last thing that she wanted to do. She felt her roommates and friends would have treated her different. She just didn't want to go through that, too scared to tell anyone. She was an innocent Mormon girl, and in her religion it would be better to die than to lose your virginity. So Rhonda kept quiet. She just pretended it never happened and continued on with her life. She didn't report the attack. When more murders started to take place, Rhonda started to blame herself. Maybe, possibly, she could have stopped all this. Ted Bundy might have been captured sooner. Karen Eileen Campbell was born on September 20th, 1951 in Garden City, Michigan, to Robert and Audrey Ann Campbell. On January 12, 1975, in Aspen, Colorado, Karen was on vacation with her boyfriend and his children at the Wildwood Inn, which is now called the Wildwood Lodge. This vacation was a mixture of business and pleasure. During the trip, her fiancé, the doctor, was planning on attending a cardiology conference in Aspen. While he was attending seminars, Karen took the kids sightseeing. At the time, Karen and her fiancé, Dr. Raymond Godowski, were on a trip to Colorado with his son and daughter. Although Dr. Raymond was 9 years older than her, the couple were madly in love. Corinne also had a great relationship with his children. She decided to retrieve a magazine from her room at the Wildwood Inn at Snowmass. She took the elevator to the second floor. When Karen exited the elevator on the second floor, she saw a group of doctors who she recognized from the cardiology seminar. After saying hello and making polite conversation with them, she continued down the walkway towards her room. She never made it back to the room. 23-year-old registered nurse Karen disappeared while walking down a well-lit hallway between the elevator and her room. This was the last time anyone saw Karen Campbell. After this exchange, she simply vanished. It was as though the hotel had opened up and swallowed her whole. Her fiancé realizes that something is wrong. As time continued to pass by, her fiancé Raymond started to wonder why she was taking so long. Soon after, his wonder turned into anxiety, and he began to worry that she had fallen and hurt herself. As a result, he decided to go upstairs and check on her. However, when he knocked on the door, Karen didn't answer. When Raymond retrieved a spare key from reception and entered the room, there was no sign of his fiancée. Furthermore, the magazine she went looking for was still in the room, and there were no signs that anything sinister had taken place. Fearing the worst, Raymond decided to call the Aspen Police Department and report Karen missing. The responding officers assured Raymond that she would probably show up later on, after all of the bars had closed. Raymond disagreed with their assessment. He knew that her disappearance was extremely out of character. At the time she was suffering from the flu, she had also turned down the chance to drink cocktails while they were having dinner with friends. The idea that she had run off to a bar or some party without telling him just didn't make any sense. That night, the responding officers called Karen's description out over the radio, and patrol cars kept an eye out for the missing woman. The next morning, Karen had still not returned. As a result, the police stepped it up a gear and decided to take a far more active approach. Throughout the day, officers questioned the hotel's guests and searched each room. However, this search turned out to be fruitless. They searched everywhere for Karen, from the 140-room lodge, elevator shafts, and crawl spaces. Investigators were unable to find any signs of Karen or any clues that may indicate where she had gone. Her nude body was found later next to a dirt road just outside the resort. 5 weeks after Karen went missing, a local worker discovered a body less than 3 miles away from the Wildwood Inn. At around 9 a.m. on February 17th, Louise Oliver was driving along Owl Creek Road when she noticed that a number of birds were hovering around an area on a nearby snowbank. Upon realizing that something was attracting a group of birds' attention, she decided to investigate. After trudging roughly 8 yards through the snow, the worker recoiled in horror. Before her lay the naked body of Karen Campbell. Her frozen remains had been lying there for nearly 40 days. Following the discovery of Karen's remains, it took more than 24 hours for her body to thaw out. In the meantime, the pathologist had to use dental records to positively identify her. According to the coroner's report, her skull sustained multiple heavy fractures. She had been killed by blows to her head from a blunt instrument that left distinctive linear grooved depressions on her skull. Her assailant had slit her left earlobe, and her body also bore deep cuts from a sharp weapon. Her body also appeared to be chewed and dragged by animals. By all accounts, this was a brutal assault. After examining the contents of Karen's stomach, authorities were able to determine that her murder took place shortly after she went missing. Due to decomposition and animal destruction, it was physically impossible to determine whether or not her attacker had sexually assaulted her. However, because her clothes were missing, detectives were pretty confident that they were dealing with a sex crime. They were also mindful of the fact that women had been disappearing in the nearby states of Utah and Washington. Ted Bundy ultimately confessed to the murder of Karen Campbell. Although we do not know the exact details of the crime itself, we do know that Bundy admitted to doing his thing that night. In theory, Bundy may have situated himself very close to an exterior flight of stairs, which were adjacent to the elevator Karen emerged from. Those stairs led to another flight of stairs which spilled into the parking lot. In other words, Bundy wasn't accessing the more traveled route of the elevator to the lobby and out the front door. At the end of his life, Bundy told investigator Mike Fisher he'd been using crutches that night. He'd requested assistance carrying his ski boots from another woman initially, encountering her somewhere else on the grounds of the inn, but the woman ignored him. Then he'd encountered Karen on a breezeway near her room, and she'd volunteered to help him. Bundy said when they reached his car, he hit her over the head. He must have been parked somewhere very secluded, or the lot was not heavily trafficked, because he described murdering Karen, and I quote, "I did my thing," he said, right there in the car, giving the impression that he must not have driven elsewhere first. The evidence also backs up his admission. On the day that Karen went missing, credit card receipts show that Ted purchased gas in the nearby town of Glenwood Springs, which is just 40 miles away from Aspen. Furthermore, when the FBI analyzed his Volkswagen Beetle, they discovered hairs that were microscopically similar to the hairs on Karen's head. After a 2-month cooling-off period, Ted Bundy makes his way to Vail, Colorado. Julie Lyle Cunningham was born on January 10, 1949, in Winchester, Massachusetts. Julie was 5'5" and 111 pounds with brown hair parted in the middle. At the time, Julie had been depressed and potentially suicidal. Then on March 15, 1975, 100 miles northeast of Snowmass Village in Vail, Colorado, part-time ski instructor Julie Lyle Cunningham disappeared early in the evening after she left her apartment in the Apollo Park neighborhood and disappeared while walking from her apartment to visit a local tavern named the Donovan Copper Bar. She had a dinner date with a friend. Bundy later told Colorado investigators that Julie walked over to his car in a parking lot named the Lion's Head to offer him help, for she saw him struggling on crutches. He asked her to carry his ski boots to his car. She had no idea who he was, how evil he was, or that she was about to die. No one did. Bundy was charming, as the evil often are. According to Bundy's jailhouse confession, once at his car they exchanged pleasantries. Cunningham moved closer to help Bundy, who appeared to be struggling with his crutches. When she was within arm's reach, Bundy snatched her to him, knocked her unconscious with a crowbar, handcuffed her, and stuffed her in the trunk in the front area of his Volkswagen. He got on Interstate 70 and drove west to the desert, where he yanked her out of the trunk and sexually assaulted her. Bundy said that after she regained consciousness, she tried to escape. He said he managed to catch her before she could flee and strangled her. The body was then left in the desert, where it remained undiscovered. Bundy then told an investigator how a month after the murder he returned and buried the remains. "I don't know why, I just sometimes do that," he said. Bundy often returned to the dump sites to the bodies of his victims. Sometimes this was to engage in necrophilia with the remains, something he did several times with some victims until putrefaction prevented anything further. Ted Bundy said the shallow gravesite was near Rife, Colorado, in a high desert area with a circular drive and some large trees. His credit card receipts for that time revealed that Bundy had bought gas from Golden, Dillon, and Silverthorne in Colorado on the day Julie Cunningham went missing. With her long hair parted in the middle, Cunningham fit the profile of Ted Bundy's other victims, who were mostly all young college-aged women, pretty and trusting. Removing her clothes, he later donated them to a charity. In April 1989, a team of experts who specialized in finding bodies brought a bloodhound to a likely spot, but her body was never found. Then almost a month later, Ted would strike again. Denise Lynn Oliverson was born on August 10, 1950 in Grand Junction, Colorado. She was 24 years old, 5'4" and 105 pounds. Denise was married in 1970 to Joe Oliverson. On April 6, 1975, Denise had an argument with her husband, and she rode her bike from 1619 Lavetta Street en route to her parents' house in order to calm down. But she never arrived. Her husband assumed she had stayed the night at her parents' home when she didn't return home. The next day, on April 7th, a railroad employee spotted her sandals and yellow 10-speed bicycle under a viaduct just a block from her home. It was under the 5th Street Bridge near the railroad tracks near the Utah-Colorado border in Grand Junction. Bundy confessed he abducted Oliverson, killed her in his car near the Utah state line, and dumped her body in the Colorado River 5 miles west of Grand Junction. This admission was supported by gas receipts, which showed that he was in the city on the same day that Oliverson went missing. Ted started to prey on younger victims. They're more naive and easier to control. Younger victims are more willing to believe and also like to help people. If you tell a child that you have some candy, they'll go with you. If you tell a child that you've lost a puppy, they'll help you. So younger victims were easier to manipulate. Lynette Dawn Culver was born on July 31st, 1962 in Renton, Washington. She was only 12 years old. Lynette was the youngest of 3 children, one of whom died before she was born. She was born in Washington and moved to Idaho in 1967. She lived with her family on Fairbanks Street. And she had a good relationship with her family. In 1975, a 7th grader, she was a good student and was considered a normal preteen. But on May 6, 1975, Bundy parked outside of the Alameda Junior High School in Pocatello, Idaho, north of Salt Lake City. And after seeing Lynette Dawn Culver walking alone, he decided he had to have her. Lynette decided to leave school on her lunch break. Bundy then lured her into his vehicle before driving her to his Holiday Inn hotel room. He then sexually assaulted Lynette Culver and drowned her in the bathtub. He disposed of her body in the Snake River north of Pocatello. Bundy reportedly provided intimate details about Lynette's personal life in his confession later. Her body was never found. In the middle of May, 3 of Bundy's Washington State DS co-workers, including Carol Boone, visited him in Salt Lake City and stayed for a week in his apartment. He spent a week in Seattle with Liz in early June, and they discussed getting married again the following Christmas. Liz never told him of her multiple conversations with authorities in King County and Salt Lake County Police. Bundy didn't disclose neither his ongoing relationship with Boone nor a romance with an Utah law student. Susan Curtis was born on May 18, 1960, in Salt Lake City, Utah. Susan was a mere 15 years old, with brown hair and hazel eyes, standing 5'7" and 120 pounds. Susan was a freshman at Woods Cross High School. She was on the track team and the girls' baseball team. On June 28th, 15-year-old Susan Curtis vanished from the campus of Brigham Young University in Provo, 45 miles south of Salt Lake City. She was attending the Bountiful Orchard Youth Conference. The young girl was a very athletic teenager. She'd ridden her bicycle 50 miles from Bountiful to Provo to attend the conference. There was a formal banquet early in the evening on the first day of the conference that was held at the Wilkinson Student Center. Susan was last seen at around 7 p.m. wearing a full-length yellow evening gown. She had just eaten dinner and was worried about food possibly being stuck in her new braces, and left her friends to walk the quarter-mile back to her room to brush her teeth, telling one of them she'd be back in a few minutes. The journey was fairly short and should have only taken her about 10 to 13 minutes. It was about 1/2 mile away. When she didn't come back to the banquet, Barbara, her sister who came with her, went looking for Susan, and when she went to inspect her toothbrush, it was bone dry, meaning she never made it back to her room. She has never been heard from again. Then, on August 16, 1975, during was in early morning hours, around 1 a.m., Ted Bundy stops in a residential area, and a police patrolman sitting in his car waiting for his shift to end notices Bundy. When Ted notices the police officer, he jumps back into his car and drives away. He's driving very erratically. The state trooper Bob Hayward of Granger, Utah, follows him. When the officer flashes his lights, Ted Bundy speeds off. After the officer corners Bundy, Ted just says, "I'm just lost." But by then the patrolman's spidey senses are tingling. He notices that the passenger front seat is laying on the rear seats. After the officer searched his car, he found a ski mask, a second mask fashioned from pantyhose, a crowbar, handcuffs, trash bags, a coil of rope, an ice pick, and other items initially assumed to be burglary tools. Bundy explained that the ski mask was for skiing, he had found the handcuffs in a dumpster, and the rest were common household items. Officer Haywood was immediately suspicious because he knew that a man that handcuffed Carol Darunch was on the loose, so the state trooper took Ted Bundy into custody. This arrest attracted the attention of another detective, Jerry Thompson, because Ted was driving a Volkswagen Beetle. He remembered a similar suspect and car description from November 1974 Darunch kidnapping and Bundy's identification from Liz Klopfer's phone call a month earlier. That's when they realized Ted might be the same man that fit the description of the assailant who tried to kidnap Carol Darunch. On October 2nd, detectives put Bundy into a lineup, and Carol Darunch immediately identified him as Officer Roseland. Also, the witnesses from Bountiful recognized him as the stranger at the Viewmont High School auditorium. There was more than enough evidence to charge him with aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault in the Darunch case. Bundy denied knowing Carol, but he had no alibi. In October of 1975, Ted was charged with the aggravated kidnapping of Carol Darunch. While Ted is waiting to post bail, the police searched his apartment. In a search of Bundy's apartment, police found a guide to Colorado ski resorts with a checkmark by the Wildwood Inn. They also found a brochure that advertised the Viewmont High School play in Bountiful, where Deborah Jean Kent disappeared. Police still did not have sufficient evidence to detain Bundy, so he was released on his own recognizance, with a $15,000 bond, which his parents paid for. He later said that searchers missed a hidden collection of Polaroid photographs of his victims, which he destroyed after he was released. When Ted was first arrested, his family and friends were in total disbelief. With the Ted Bundy that they knew was not a violent man, but some people that did know Ted thought he was peculiar. Often, like a chameleon, Ted Bundy would change his appearance. When Ted was first arrested, he had long hair, but by the time he went up for his lineup, he had cut his hair short and looked totally different. Each time someone saw Ted Bundy, his appearance looked totally different. Salt Lake City police placed Bundy on 24-hour surveillance, and Jerry Thompson flew to Seattle with 2 other detectives to interview Liz Klopfer. She told them that in the year prior to Bundy's move to Utah, she had discovered objects that she couldn't understand, that she found in her house and in Bundy's apartment. These items included crutches, a bag of plaster of Paris that he admitted stealing from a medical supply house, and a meat cleaver that was never used for cooking. Also, she found objects like surgical gloves, an oriental knife in a wooden case that he kept in his glove compartment, and a sack full of women's clothing. Bundy was perpetually in debt, and Liz suspected that he had stolen almost everything of significant value that he possessed. When she confronted him over a new TV and stereo, he warned her, "If you tell anyone, I'll break your effing neck." Liz said Bundy became very upset whenever she considered cutting her hair, which was long and parted in the middle. She would sometimes awaken in the middle of the night to find him under the bed covers with a flashlight, examining her body. He kept a lug wrench in the trunk of her car, another Volkswagen Beetle, which he often borrowed. The detectives confirmed that Bundy had not been with Liz on any of the nights during which the Pacific Northwest victims had vanished, nor on the day Janice Ott and Denise Nasland were abducted from Lake Sammamish State Park. Shortly thereafter, Liz was interviewed by Seattle homicide detective Kathy McChesney and learned of the existence of Diane Edwards and her brief engagement to Bundy around Christmas 1973. In September, thinking that he's smarter than the police, Bundy then sells his Volkswagen Beetle to a Midvale teenager. But Utah police impound the vehicle and FBI technicians dismantled and searched it. They found hairs matching samples obtained from Karen Campbell's body. Later, they also identified hair strands from those of Melissa Smith and Carol Darrench. FBI lab specialist Robert Neal concluded that the presence of hair strands in one car matching 3 different victims who had never met one another would be a coincidence of mind-boggling rarity. Then, in November, the 3 principal Bundy investigators, Jerry Thompson from Utah, Robert Keppel from Washington, and Michael Fisher from Colorado, met in Aspen, Colorado, and exchanged information with 30 detectives and prosecutors from 5 states. While officials left the meeting, later referred to as the Aspen Summit, convinced that Bundy was the murderer they sought, they agreed that more hard evidence would be needed before he could be charged with any of the killings. In 1976, Ted Bundy stood trial for the Carol Darrench kidnapping. On the advice of his attorney, John O'Connell, he waived his right to a jury trial due to the negative publicity surrounding the case. On March 1, 1976, after a 4-day bench trial and a weekend of deliberation, Judge Stuart Hanson Jr. found Ted Bundy guilty of kidnapping and assault. Before he was sentenced, Ted was then sent to Utah State Prison for 90-day evaluation to see whether this was a one-time event or whether he was a predator that should be locked up forever. Ted's psychiatric evaluation was done by Dr. Al Carlisle. Dr. Carlisle said Ted Bundy had the ability to make a good impression. He would smile at you. He seemed to be very confident. He would walk up and shake your hand and sit down. Ted Bundy would give the doctor the impression of a man that only told you what he wanted you to know. Dr. Carlisle tried to understand Ted by delving into every aspect of his life from his early childhood. The doctor discovered that lonely young Ted was not fitting in. He would just sort of withdraw, never knowing how to form any lasting relationships. When you are isolated like that, you have to get your satisfaction from somewhere. He withdrew into a quiet fantasy life, but then his behavior would begin to escalate. Then Ted meets his dream girl, Diane Edwards. Dr. Carlisle said, by all accounts, she was everything he wanted. She was very intelligent, outgoing, she modeled part-time. She had money, she had prestige, she had everything that Ted Bundy wanted to be. But then Diane rejected Ted Bundy. She only wanted to be friends. Diane was Ted's last attempt to be accepted, successful, and instead he was rejected. Then this dark side of Ted Bundy starts to take over. Dr. Carlisle collected all the facts from his meetings with Ted Bundy. He determined that Bundy was a very violent man. After his breakup with Diane Edwards and his resentment of his own mother, Ted Bundy definitely did not like women and had a bitter disdain for them. After it was all over, Ted Bundy smiles and said to Dr. Carlisle, "Do you really think I killed all those girls?" Dr. Carlisle looks at Ted Bundy and said, "If you did, I know you'll do it again." Ted Bundy's smile drops instantly. He then turns and walks back to his cell. In June 1976, he was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in the Utah State Prison. In October of that same year, Bundy was found hiding in the bushes of the prison yard, carrying an escape kit, road map, airline schedules, and a social security card. As a result, he spent several weeks in solitary confinement. Later that month, Colorado authorities charged him with Karen Campbell's murder. After a period of resistance, he waived extradition proceedings and was transferred to Aspen in January 1977. On June 7, 1977, Bundy was transported 40 miles from the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs to Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen, Colorado. For a preliminary hearing, he had elected to serve as his own attorney. This time, he submitted a motion to the court so that his restraints, his handcuffs, could be taken off, since he was functioning as his own lawyer in the trial. The judge excused him from wearing handcuffs or leg shackles. During a recess, Bundy asked to visit the courthouse's law library to research his case. His guard decides to take a smoke break, so Ted takes that opportunity to escape. While shielded from his guard's view behind a bookcase, he opened a window and jumped to the ground from the library on the second floor, injuring his right ankle as he landed. After shedding an outer layer of clothing, Bundy limped through Aspen as roadblocks were being set up. When authorities heard about the escape, police in Seattle were on high alert. They made sure that Liz, his girlfriend, was protected because she implicated him, just in case he decided to come back to the state of Washington. On the outskirts of Aspen, Ted hiked south onto Aspen Mountain. Near its summit, he broke into a hunting cabin and stole food, clothing, and a rifle. The following day, Bundy left the cabin and continued south toward the town of Crested Butte, but became lost in the forest. For 2 days, he wandered aimlessly on the mountain, missing 2 trails that led downward to his intended destination. While on the run, Ted Bundy ran into a rancher who told him it wasn't safe to be out here because Ted Bundy was loose. The rancher didn't even recognize that it was Ted Bundy because he had lost so much weight. He looked totally different than his picture. On June 10, 1977, Bundy broke into a camping trailer on Maroon Lake, taking food and a ski parka. However, instead of continuing southward, he walked back north toward Aspen, eluding roadblocks and search parties along the way. 3 days later, and very desperate, he stole a car at the edge of an Aspen golf course. Cold, sleep-deprived, and in constant pain from his sprained ankle, Bundy drove back into Aspen. If it hadn't been for the fact that Ted Bundy is a horrible driver, he may have gotten away. But 2 police officers noticed his car weaving in and out of its lane and pulled him over. He had been a fugitive for 6 days. In the car were maps of the mountain area around Aspen that prosecutors were using to demonstrate the location of Corinne Campbell's body. As his own attorney, Bundy had rights to discovery, indicating that Bundy had his escape already planned. He had an insatiable lust that he had to fulfill. Six months after his first escape, Bundy does it again. Back in jail in Glenwood Springs, Bundy ignored the advice of friends and legal advisors to stay put. The case against him, already weak at best, was deteriorating steadily, as pretrial motions consistently resolved in his favor. Insignificant bits of evidence were ruled inadmissible. A more rational defendant might have realized that he stood a good chance of acquittal, and that beating the murder charge in Colorado would probably have dissuaded other prosecutors. With as little as a year and a half to serve on the Carol Durant conviction, had Ted persevered, he could have been a free man. Instead, Bundy assembled a new escape plan. He acquired a detailed floor plan of Garfield County Jail and a hacksaw blade from other inmates. He received $500 in cash smuggled in over a 6-month period by visitors, Carol Boone in particular. During the evenings, while other prisoners were showering, Bundy was sawing a hole about 1 square foot between the steel reinforcing bars in his cell's ceiling. In preparation for his escape, Ted Bundy loses 35 pounds in order to squeeze through the hole in the ceiling. He was able to wriggle through and explore the crawlspace above his cell. In the weeks that followed, multiple indications of movement within the ceiling during the night were not investigated. You would think jailers would be on high alert because of his earlier escape. On the night of December 30th, 1977, with most of the jail staff on Christmas break and non-violent prisoners on furlough with their families, Bundy piled books and files in his bed, covered them with a blanket to simulate his sleeping body, and climbed into the crawl space. He broke through the ceiling into the apartment of the chief jailer, who was out for the evening with his wife. He changed into street clothes from the jailer's closet and walked out the front door to freedom. After stealing a car, Bundy drove eastward out of Glenwood Springs, but the car soon broke down in the mountains on Interstate 70. A passing motorist gave him a ride into Vail, 60 miles to the east. From there, he caught a bus to Denver, where he boarded a morning flight to Chicago. Back in Glenwood Springs, the jail's skeleton crew did not discover the escape until noon the next day, more than 17 hours later. But by then, Ted Bundy was already in Chicago. His escape was made easier due to the fact that you did not have to verify who you were when traveling, you just needed the money to travel. Ted Bundy traveled from Chicago to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where he was present in a local tavern on January 2nd, 1978. 5 days later, he stole a car and drove south to Atlanta, where he boarded a bus and arrived in Tallahassee, Florida, on the morning of January 8th, 1978. He stayed for one night at a hotel before renting a room under the alias Chris Hagen at a boarding house near the Florida State University FSU campus. Bundy later said that he initially resolved to find legitimate employment and refrain from further criminal activity, knowing he could probably remain free and undetected in Florida indefinitely as long as he did not attract the attention of police. But his lone job application at a construction site had to be abandoned when he was asked to produce identification. He reverted to his old habits of shoplifting and stealing money. Unable to control his urges and on the run for 2 weeks, Ted Bundy makes his way to another college campus. In the early hours of January 15, 1978, 1 week after his arrival in Tallahassee, he entered FSU's Chi Omega sorority house. In his hand, he carries a heavy log. The rear door to the sorority had a faulty locking mechanism. Beginning at about 2:45 a.m., he entered the room of Margaret Elizabeth Bowman was born on January 6, 1957, in Honolulu, Hawaii. She was only 21. The year is 1973, when Margaret moved to St. Pete as a teenager after her father retired from the U.S. Air Force. She graduated from St. Petersburg High School, where she was president of the French National Honor Society and a member of the Drama Club. She also loved reading. She attended St. Thomas's Episcopal Church in St. Petersburg. Margaret had traveled back to St. Petersburg the weekend prior to her death to celebrate her birthday with her family. The last time her father heard from her was when she called him upon returning to Tallahassee to say that she had arrived safely. She never considered that her own bedroom would be unsafe. Books have been written about Bundy, movies have been made about him or based on him, TV shows documenting his evil still exclaims his name, but rarely do we hear about the victims these killers destroy. When she died, she was studying art history and classical civilizations. She had just turned 21. Margaret was invited to go out for a late-night burger at an all-night diner. On the evening, she was killed, but she turned them down, deciding to go to bed instead. During the early hours of Jan 15, 1978, at 2:45 a.m., Ted Bundy entered the room of Margaret Bowman. He was holding a piece of oak firewood. Bundy bashed Margaret in the head. Margaret's head was so severely wounded that it literally laid wide open. You could see her brain. He then strangled her with a nylon stocking. He then entered the bedroom of 20-year-old Lisa Janet Levy. Lisa Janet Levy was born on February 1, 1957, in St. Petersburg, Florida. She had been a member of Congregation B'nai Israel of St. Petersburg. Lisa attended Dixie Hollins High School, where she played the flute in the band for 2 years. She was also a majorette, a member of the Civinet Service Club, and a staffer of the Dixie Legend yearbook. Lisa was very athletic and loved the outdoors. She was studying fashion merchandising at FSU. When she wasn't in school, she lived with her mother Henny and worked at the Colony Shop at Tyrone Square Mall during summers and holidays. 2 weeks before Lisa's 21st birthday, her promising life would be over. Lisa Levy was the first girl that officers found dead. Bundy entered the room of Lisa Levy and like a crazed animal beat her unconscious. She had been beaten on the head with the log. He sexually assaulted her vaginally and sodomized her with a hairspray bottle. He then strangled her to death. Upon further examination, they discovered bite marks on her buttocks and on one of her nipples. In fact, Lisa's nipple had been so severely bitten that it was almost severed from the rest of her breast. In an adjoining bedroom, he attacked Kathy Kleiner. She was in bed early. She attended a wedding earlier and had a calculus exam the next day. Kleiner thought she should study a bit before she fell asleep. Kleiner and her roommate, Karen Chandler, switched off the light and fell asleep well before midnight. Then in the early hours, she heard her bedroom door open. Kleiner tried to wake up a little bit to see who opened her door. Ted tripped over the little locker between their beds and made a little noise, says Kleiner. She remembered squinting into the dark because she didn't have her glasses on. She saw a black shadow standing above her. Whoever it was looking at me. The next thing I see, he raises his arm up over his head and slams something down on her face. It's weird because at first it just felt like a thud. It didn't hurt. That blow broke Kleiner's jaw in 3 places and ripped open her cheek. The force made her bite her tongue so badly that it was barely attached. At this point, Karen Chandler started waking up and he went to her bedside. Ted lifted his arm and slammed the wood down on Karen's face. Kleiner was whimpering, trying and failing to shout. Kleiner is holding her face and it's wet and sticky and all she's doing is making gurgling sounds. Now the shadow returned to her, arms raised to land another blow. She curled into a little ball as small as she could be. She knew she was going to die. That's when the whole room was flooded with light, illuminated by the headlights of a car pulling up outside to drop someone home. The curtains were never closed in the sorority sister's bedroom because Kleiner and Chandler loved the sunlight. The car light spooked Ted Bundy. He feared the people in the car outside had seen him. It was enough to stop him. Bundy left the room. Karen Chandler, age 21, who suffered a concussion, broken jaw, loss of teeth, a crushed finger, and a broken arm. Chandler and Kleiner survived the attack. Kleiner attributed their survival to Nita Neary. Karen later woke up in the hospital with no recollection of what had happened to her. Her father would later tell her of the horrible news of her friends Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy. At approximately 3 a.m., resident Nita Neary arrived home from a date and entered the house by a back door. She proceeded toward the front entrance hall of the house where the main stairway was located. She then heard sounds of someone running down the stairs. When she arrived at the front entrance hall, Miss Neary saw a man standing at the front door. The man held the log in his right hand and had his left hand on the doorknob. Miss Neary saw a right-side profile of the man's face. She was able to look at him for several seconds before he left. Nita Neary then went upstairs to her room, awakened her roommate, and told her what she had seen. She would later testify about this intruder. After some discussion with her roommate and another house resident about whether to report the incident to the police, beating victim Karen Chandler came out of her room. The other women could see that she was badly injured, so they summoned medical help and the police. The severity of the intruder's actions were soon discovered. Kleiner remembers drifting in and out of consciousness as chaos ensued. Other women looked into the blood-splattered bedrooms and vomited. A sorority sister sat on the drenched covers, wrapped her arms around Kathy Kleiner, and talked to her while they waited for help. Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman were dead. Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner had been severely beaten, both telling authorities that they were attacked in their sleep and could not describe their attacker. But Nita Neary could. She told the police that she saw a white male, clean-shaven with a dark complexion, about 5 feet 8 inches tall, weighing about 160 pounds. Wearing a dark toboggan cap, a wide waist-length jacket, and a light-colored pants, and carrying a large stick. Her attention to detail was phenomenal. While the police were taking statements and searching for evidence at the Chi Omega house, unbelievably, another attack was taking place only a few blocks away. Police got the call and thought to themselves, there's no way this could be the same guy, for there had not been a crime of this magnitude in over 10 years. Could the same guy actually go just a few blocks away and attack another woman? Ted Bundy's crimes are starting to become messy. He's not taking the time to think out his crimes anymore. Forensic evidence and fingerprints are everywhere because he knows this is his last hurrah. After fleeing the sorority house, he escaped west to Dunwoody Street. In what can only be described as a psychotic frenzy, Bundy broke into a basement apartment and attacked 21-year-old FSU student. A 21-year-old Florida State University dance major, Cheryl Thomas, got dolled up and met her friends at a popular disco club in downtown Tallahassee earlier that evening. They spent the evening doing the hustle and the bump all over the dance floor before heading home just after midnight. Thomas went to bed, totally unaware that moments later she'd be attacked by one of the country's most notorious serial killers at about 4 a.m. in a duplex apartment on Dunwoody Street. Cheryl's jaw was broken in 2 places, her shoulder dislocated, and she had 5 skull fractures, leaving her permanently deaf in her left ear. Her neighbor, Debbie Ciccarelli, heard the commotion and called Thomas to make sure she was safe. For she woke up to this loud, banging sound, Ciccarelli says. And then she could hear Cheryl moaning, whimpering. She called Cheryl and she could hear the phone ringing because the walls were so thin. Cheryl wasn't answering. On her bed, police found bodily fluids. A pantyhose mask containing 2 hairs matched to Ted Bundy. Thomas woke up from a coma a few days later in the hospital with little recollection of what happened. The injuries Thomas sustained effectively ended her dream of becoming a professional dancer. While leaving the crime scene at the Chi Omega house, Leon County, Sheriff Ken Katsaris received a phone call. The phone was in his car, one of 2 car telephones in the state at that time. The other telephone was connected to the governor's office, Governor Bob Graham. The sheriff pulled over to the side of the road to take the call. The caller was coming from the state of Colorado. The detectives in that area were alerting the sheriff that there was an escaped prisoner from Colorado. The authorities in Colorado heard about the Chi Omega murders and wanted to let the sheriff know that an escaped prisoner is on the loose and he tends to murder co-eds. Sheriff Ken asked the investigators in Colorado what was the name of the suspect that you're looking for. They told him Ted Bundy. What was the likelihood that an escaped criminal from Colorado would make it all the way down to the deep south in Florida to commit these murders? Because Ted Bundy was locked up for so long, his compulsion to murder grew. Ted Bundy had a bloodlust that he needed to satisfy. He was going to continue to murder until he was apprehended. On that same morning, at approximately 5 a.m., 2 men who knew Bundy arrived at the Oak rooming house and proceeded inside to the room where one of the men lived. They saw Ted Bundy standing in the front of the house, looking off in the distance in the direction of the FSU campus, the scene of the crime. As they passed Bundy, both men casually greeted him, but he did not respond. Several hours later, at about noon on Sunday, a group of residents of the Oak rooming house, Ted Bundy was among them. They were discussing the news of the crimes. One man said the perpetrator was probably some lunatic who was probably hiding out. Then Bundy replied, "No, I think it's a professional job, and that the killer was someone who had committed such crimes before and had probably already departed the area." Then on February 8th, Ted Bundy stole an FSU van from the media department. Bundy drove 150 miles on US Route 90 to Jacksonville in the stolen van. A little over 2 weeks later, in a parking lot, Bundy approached 14-year-old Leslie Parmenter, the daughter of the Jacksonville Police Department's chief of detectives, identifying himself as Richard Burton of the fire department. But Bundy retreated when Parmenter's older brother arrived and confronted him. When Bundy could not attack a co-ed, he would victimize unsuspecting adolescents. Ted Bundy, at the height of his perversion, by this time no one is off limits. That same afternoon, he backtracked 60 miles westward to Lake City, parking his stolen van near Lake City Junior High School. Ted Bundy sitting in his van, searching for his next available victim. The beautiful Kimberly Diana Leach was born on October 28, 1965. A very caring young girl, her friends were drawn to her. On a cold rain morning, February 9, 1978, a rainy and drizzly day, almost 3 weeks after the Chi Omega attacks, 12-year-old Kimberly, a 7th grader, was at Lake City Junior High School and about to start her PE class in the school auditorium. Suddenly, a student from her homeroom class named Tandy Bonner comes to tell Kimberly she left her purse in homeroom class. So the 2 students walk back to Mr. Bishop's homeroom. Once Kimberly leaves the homeroom class with her purse, she walks back across the parking lot by herself. But unfortunately, Kimberly never makes it back to the auditorium. Tandy, the classmate, would later say that when she first went to the auditorium to get Kimberly, she remembers seeing a man standing outside. A little later, classmate Lisa Little, who went to their designated spot to meet up with Kimberly like they did every day to go to their next period class together. But Kimberly wasn't there. Her friends instantly knew something was wrong. Kim was not a student to skip class, to leave campus. She was a shy little girl. By 9:30, the school realized Kimberly was missing. The school called Frida, Kim's mom, who was a hairdresser, to see if Kim came home. Of course, she had not. Concerned for her daughter, Mom came up to the school. They searched and found Kim's purse lying in the dirt, and it looked like a scuffle had taken place. When Kim didn't show up after school, the authorities were called. Authorities urged the public to come forward with any information. A firefighter named Lieutenant Andy Anderson remembered seeing a man walking across the school's campus and holding a young girl by the arm. He assumed that man was her father. The firefighter, who was coming home, had seen the man and the 12-year-old walking toward a white van parked in the middle of the street, not at the curb but right in the travel lane. Another witness saw a young girl close to tears being pushed into the passenger seat of a white van by a scraggly man she assumed was an angry parent. That same morning, another witness saw a white van swerving almost out of control on the highway, the angry driver shouting towards the passenger seat. 7 weeks later, after an intensive search, police officers discovered partially mummified remains of Kimberly Leach, dumped in an unused pig pen near Sewanee River State Park, 35 miles northwest of Lake City. 1 week later at 1:30 a.m. on the 15th of February in Pensacola, Florida. Forensic experts determined that Kimberly had been sexually assaulted before having her throat cut and her genitals mutilated with a knife. The white van that had been stolen from the university in Tallahassee was recovered some 500 or so miles away, and authorities found signs of trauma inside the van. There were branches and leaves and further evidence of a receipt with a $26 figure on it. Authorities believed that he went by Green Acres Sporting Goods store and bought a very large knife, which was a hunting knife, which he used to kill Kimberly Leach on February 9, 1978. Kimberly Diane Leach would be his last victim, the one victim that would ultimately send him to his grave. With Kimberly's death, Ted Bundy reveals the monster he truly is. Suddenly, at 1:45 a.m. on February 11, 1978, in Tallahassee, a police officer saw Bundy standing near a building. The officer approached Ted Bundy and asked him what he was doing there. During their conversation, the officer saw an unexpired license plate inside the car and asked to see it. Bundy complied, and the officer walked to his police car to call the tag number in by radio. When he did so, Ted Bundy fled the scene before the officer noticed. Miraculously, on February 12th, with insufficient cash to pay his overdue rent and a growing suspicion that police were closing in on him, Bundy stole another Volkswagen and fled Tallahassee. Clearly, Ted had a fetish for Volkswagens, driving westward across the Florida Panhandle. 3 days later, at around 1:30 a.m., he was stopped by Pensacola police officer David Lee near the Alabama state line. A wants and warrants check showed his Volkswagen Beetle was stolen. When attempted to place Ted under arrest, Bundy kicked the officer's legs out from under him and took off running. Lee fired 2 warning shots, then gave chase and tackled Bundy. The two struggled over Lee's gun, and finally the officer hit him in the head with the butt of his weapon. He then took Bundy into custody. In the stolen vehicle, there were 3 IDs belonging to 3 female FSU students, 21 stolen credit cards, and a stolen television set. Also found were a pair of dark-rimmed non-prescription glasses and a pair of plaid slacks, later identified as the disguise worn by Richard Burton Fire Department in Jacksonville. As Lee transported his suspect to jail, unaware that he had just arrested one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives, he heard Bundy say, "I wish you had killed me." Bundy originally told the officer that his name was Ken Meisner, who just happened to be a well-known Florida state athlete, who amazingly looked similar to Bundy. But when the real Ken Meisner contacted police, they had no idea who he was. But ultimately, when fingerprint identification came back, police realized they had FBI most wanted fugitive Ted Bundy. After Sheriff Katsaris had him in custody, he made sure Bundy was placed in a steel-lined jail cell. He secured his prisoner, making sure his cell had 3 different locks. 3 different guards had 1 key to each lock. The sheriff told his officers if at any time one guard had all 3 keys, the whole shift would be fired. Sheriff Ken was determined that Bundy would remain in custody, especially since the sheriff had 3 young daughters himself. After the attacks, Sheriff Ken went to examine the evidence of the deceased women of Chi Omega. The sheriff discovers that there were bite marks on Lisa Levy buttocks, but there were 2 sets of bite marks, meaning that Ted Bundy bit Lisa Levy in the buttocks, released his grip, and bit her again. The sheriff thought to himself that maybe he could use this. He later spoke to other investigators, and they came up with the idea to get a warrant for dental impressions. So the sheriff got a warrant for Ted Bundy's mouth. Sheriff Ken took Ted Bundy to his own dentist. Standing in leg irons, Ted Bundy entered the room and was standing in front of 3 dentists. When Ted saw the dentist, he yelled, "You can't do this, you can't do this, I want my lawyer." Sheriff Katsaris told Bundy, "We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. The judge has given me permission to get these impressions with as much force as reasonably necessary." Suffice to say, Ted Bundy cooperated. Those dental impressions would become a key piece of evidence in convicting Theodore Robert Bundy. This would be the first time dental impressions were used in a court case. DNA wasn't available yet and wouldn't be for another 10 years, so Ted Bundy case was the first of its kind. Dr. Richard Suvirin would later testify in court linking Ted Bundy's dental impressions to bite marks on Lisa Levy's body. It was Sheriff Ken Katsaris' responsibility to read Ted Bundy's indictment to him. As the sheriff tries to read the charges against him, Ted Bundy, in front of all the cameras, decided to make a show of it, stating to the sheriff that "You said you'd get me, so now you got me. But that's all you're going to get." You could see the anger and arrogance in Ted Bundy's face as he performed for the cameras. Sheriff Ken soon became a thorn in Ted Bundy's side. One day, Sheriff Ken came to Bundy's cell, leans against the door and says, "I know what your issue is, Ted. I know why you killed all these women. Your hatred stems from your mother. You hate the fact that your mother never told you who your father was. That's why you killed these women." Enraged by the sheriff's comments, Ted Bundy tore apart his cell. Ted Bundy has always been about status, being successful and being accepted. Because he's a narcissist, he can't handle rejection. That fact that he was rejected at birth consumed him. Because of his illegitimate birth, it made him a bastard, something he detested. He couldn't stand what his mother had done to him, and all these women paid for his rage against his mother and also his girlfriend, Diane Edwards. In May 1978, a Florida grand jury indicted Bundy on charges of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and burglary for the Chi Omega killings and assaults. Ted Bundy always felt that he was smarter than everybody else, smarter than the police, the lawyers, and the judges. When Ted Bundy lost his first criminal case against Carol Durant, after he listened to his lawyer, Ted Bundy decided that he would never trust another lawyer. So Ted decided to be his own lawyer during his criminal murder cases. But one thing Ted Bundy did not learn in law school was the first rule that you're taught when you go to law school is this, that the person that defends themselves has a fool for a lawyer. He stood trial in June 1979 in the Florida Circuit Court for Dade County with Judge Edward Cowart presiding. The trial was covered by 250 reporters from 5 continents and was the first to be televised nationally in the United States. There were groups of groupies that filled the courtroom, as well as devoted Carol Boone, who was their daily. Everyone thought that she was his girlfriend, but she just described herself as a close friend that believes in his innocence. 4 or 5 years Carol had helped Ted prepare for his court cases since the Carol Durant case. Despite the presence of 5 court-appointed attorneys, Bundy handled much of his own defense. From the beginning, he sabotaged the entire defense effort out of spite, distrust, and grandiose delusion. Ted was facing murder charges with a possible death sentence, and all that mattered to him, apparently, was that he was in charge. According to Mike Minerva, a Tallahassee public defender and member of the defense team, a pretrial plea bargain was negotiated in which Bundy would plead guilty to killing Lisa Levy, Margaret Bowman, and Kimberly Leach in exchange for a firm 75-year prison sentence. Prosecutors agreed to a deal because prospects of losing at trial were very good. Ted Bundy, on the other hand, saw the plea bargain not only as a means of avoiding the death penalty, but also as a tactical move. He could enter his plea, then wait a few years for evidence to disintegrate or become lost, and for witnesses to die, move on, or retract their testimony. Once the case against him had deteriorated beyond repair, he could file a post-conviction motion to set aside the plea and secure an acquittal. However, Bundy refused the deal at the last minute. He realizes he was going to have to stand up in front of the whole world and say he was guilty, Minerva said. He just couldn't do it. The jury was allowed to hear details of Carol Durant's previous kidnapping. Nita Neary also gave a spot-on identification of the man she saw in the Chi Omega house on the night that the 2 co-eds lost their lives. The defense tried to shake her identification, but she stood firm on what she saw. about who she saw that she did a composite drawing based off of what she saw, but the most damning evidence was that of forensic dentist Dr. Richard Cerveron. He testified that the bite mark comparison can provide identification of a high degree of reliability, meaning the teeth marks made on Lisa Levy's buttocks are the same as the impression taken out of Ted Bundy's mouth. It was basically a signature, no one else had one like it. They even enlarged the bite mark and put it up on the big screen so the jury could see it clearly. These bite marks are what made the difference in Ted Bundy's case. There was no getting around them. Bundy actually called to testify one of the officers of the Kish Omega attacks to testify on the witness stand, and it was a spectacle. He wanted the officer to describe in excruciating detail what he saw when he went into Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy's room. Ted Bundy couldn't help himself. He's reliving his crimes through what the officer tells him. He can envision what he had done to those two victims. Once that officer described what he saw on the witness stand, you could see that it cemented in the minds of the jury that he was guilty. No defense lawyer in his right mind would ever ask a crime scene investigator to describe in gory details what they saw. Ted Bundy actually looked like he was enjoying the descriptions of the fallen women. This is the same reason serial killers tend to take trophies they want to envision their crimes. Because he would never again commit a murder, he wanted to hear about it. The jury deliberated for less than 7 hours before convicting Ted Bundy on July 24, 1979 of the Bowman and Levy murders. 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder for the assaults on Kathy Kleiner, Karen Chandler, and Cheryl Thomas, and also 2 counts of burglary. Ted Bundy always thought he was a superb lawyer, but clearly that was only in his mind. Despite all of this, Ted Bundy, during his pre-sentencing hearing, professed his innocence. It was now time for Judge Edward Cowart to render his sentence, and he said, and I quote, "This court, independent of, but in agreement with, do advise your sentence rendered by the jury, does hereby impose the sentence of death upon the defendant Theodore Robert Bundy." Ted Bundy, so full of pride and arrogance, was astonished that he could not convince the jury that he was innocent. On January 7th, the Kimberly Leach trial began. Ted represented himself in the trial, but he also had co-counsel. What was especially disturbing is the number of groupies in attendance at his trial. Leslie Parmenter testified about how Ted attempted to abduct her by saying he was a firefighter. But her older brother walked up and stopped the abduction. Her brother attempted to get his license plate, but he got away. Examination of the stolen white van indicated that the van was wiped clean of fingerprints. They discovered bloodstains in the van, which was Kimberly's blood type. In July of 1978, Bundy was convicted of kidnapping and first-degree murder. The jury recommended death. Bundy was subsequently sentenced to a term of life imprisonment for the kidnapping conviction and death for the murder. In the penalty phase of the trial, when the jury is deciding whether he should be sentenced to death, Ted Bundy called Carol Boone as a character witness in his trial, whom he spoke to on a daily basis. While on trial, Bundy actually asked her to marry him. She said yes. In open court with a sitting judge, Bundy pronounced that he and Boone were now married based on Florida law, and they just happened to have a notary sitting in the court to make it official. In the eyes of the law, it is a legally binding marriage. The next day, Bundy was sentenced to death. He shouted, "Tell the jury you are wrong." In 1982, Carol Boone gave birth to Ted Bundy's daughter. Liz Cleffer ultimately revealed to investigators that she had telephone conversations with Bundy before he died. They talked for about an hour. He told her that he was going to try to clear things up. Ted told Liz that he was sick and he was consumed by something that he didn't understand, that he just couldn't contain it. Ted said he tried to control it, but that it consumed his mind. He called it the force. That is why he dropped out of law school. He tried to have a normal life, but he just couldn't do it. He became too preoccupied with the force. He had been fighting these thoughts right before he even met Liz in 1969. That the sickness was taking over him. On July 2nd, 1986, Bundy is just 15 minutes from being executed when he obtained a stay of execution. Another attempt is made in December of that same year. In an attempt to get a stay of execution, Bundy agreed to confess to murders he hadn't been convicted of. He gave details of the murders of Karen Campbell and Julie Cunningham, but for some reason he refused to discuss in detail the murder of Denise Oliverson. He confessed to 30 homicides in over 7 states from 1974 to 1978. Bundy's crimes was the first time the title of a serial killer was used. In many of the cases, the women's bodies were never recovered. The true victim count of Ted Bundy is believed to be much higher, based on a conversation he had with his girlfriend Liz, that he started his murderous crimes as early as 1969. After a decade of exhausting his appeals, Ted Bundy's time finally runs out. The man that brought the lives of so many to an end now comes to the end of his life. On the eve of his execution, he talked of suicide. He did not want to give the state the satisfaction of watching him die. He refused his last meal. He talked to his mom twice. Carol Boone had championed Bundy's innocence throughout all of his trials. She felt deeply betrayed by his confessions right before his execution that he was in fact guilty. She moved back to Washington State with his daughter and refused to accept his phone calls on the morning of his execution. Terrified of his own death, Theodore Robert Bundy wept, not for those he killed, but for himself. On March 18, 1980, convicted serial killer Ted Bundy agreed to a series of interviews. However, as Bundy had never been convicted for any of the Washington murders and disappearances, and not wishing to implicate himself in any crimes at that time, he decided to talk about the victims in the third person, giving his opinion of what he believed the killer had done to the young women. With Ted Bundy on death row, convicted for the Chi Omega killings and the murder of Kimberly Leach, these interviews were his opportunity to talk about and essentially relive a subject that fascinated him. But his true motivation for his confessions were to save his life. If he told the truth, he believed he could prolong his life. Indeed, detectives were convinced that Bundy was obsessed with serial murder, with FBI agent Bill Hagmaier, who formed a special relationship with Bundy, later commenting about his almost reverence towards the act of killing itself. He worshipped it. It was his opportunity to play God. Bundy often gave conflicting accounts of his crimes, telling people different versions, most likely in an effort to withhold information on his crimes so that only he knew the ultimate truth. After a decade of exhausting his appeals and confessing his crimes, Ted Bundy's time finally runs out. He seemed somber, even bowed his head and cried. In Florida State Prison, the man that ended over 30 women's lives as well as young girls. As he walks to the death chamber, Ted Bundy is yelling out the details of Susan Curtis' murder, but that would not save his life. Finding the remains of Deborah Kent, Nancy Wilcox, Denise Oliverson, Julie Cunningham, Lynette Culver, and Susan Curtis would be forever lost. At age 42, Theodore Robert Bundy, on January 24, 1989, at around 7 a.m., was strapped into the electric chair. His last words were directed at his attorney Jim Coleman and Methodist minister Fred Lawrence. "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." Before his death, he gave one last phone call to his mother to give her parting words. Only God knows what he could have said to her. Up until the very end, his dear mother believed that he was an innocent man. What a horrific memory to leave behind, knowing that the child you loved most in the world destroyed so many. One man that witnessed the execution said Ted Bundy's eyes almost looked like a child whose mother had caught him doing something wrong, an expression knowing that this was the end. Clearly there was something missing in Ted Bundy's psyche that we all have, humanity. Theodore Robert Bundy was executed by electric chair at 7:16 a.m. Prison authorities came outside to the crowd, who were in joyous anticipation of Ted Bundy's execution, and the prison official raised his hands to signify that Ted Bundy was indeed dead. The crowd cheered as if they were at a football game for the death of a man. Hundreds of revelers sang, danced, and set off fireworks in a pasture across from the prison as the execution was carried out, then cheered as the white hearse containing Bundy's corpse departed the prison. He was cremated in Gainesville, and his ashes were scattered at an undisclosed location in the Cascade Range of Washington State in accordance with his will, in the same area where he dumped many of his victims. After Bundy's execution, numerous women contacted Anne Rule, the crime author, and wrote or called to say they were deeply depressed because Bundy was dead. Many had corresponded with him, each believing that she was his only one. Several said they suffered nervous breakdowns when he died. Even in death, Ted damaged women, Anne Rule said. They should realize that they were conned by the master con men. They are grieving for a shadow man that never existed. Ted Bundy was the perfect storm, A maniacal, desperately wicked man with an insatiable lust, Ted was the perfect killing machine. A man who stated he had no remorse or guilt, he felt he hadn't done anything wrong. A meticulously detail-oriented predator. The only reason Ted Bundy got caught is because he's a total narcissist. He thought he was smarter than everyone else, and that he could manipulate his way out of anything. That is why he went to Lake Sammamish in the daytime, and actually had the nerve to tell people his real name. He described himself as the meanest SOB you will ever meet. The only remorse he had was for himself. Ted Bundy confessed to over 30 murders, even though authorities believed that the number was way higher than that, even in the hundreds. Based on his conversation with Liz from 1969 to 1978 in intervals of every 30 days, that is way more than 30 victims. A serial killer is defined as an individual that kills 3 or more people in 3 or more locations with a cooling off period. Ted Bundy's cooling off period was every 30 days. He wasn't going to stop until someone stopped him. That someone was Florida Sheriff Ken Katsaris, who made a vow that his reign of terror would stop in Florida. When Sheriff Ken saw Lisa Levy's body at the coroner office, he made himself a promise that he would stop Ted Bundy. One unique obstacles for law enforcement were Bundy's generic, essentially anonymous physical features, and a curious chameleon-like ability to change his appearance. Bundy was well aware of this unusual quality, and he exploited it using subtle modifications of facial hair or hairstyle to significantly alter his appearance as necessary. A manufacturing error in fibers from his own clothing, ironically, provided a crucial incriminating link to the Kimberly Leach's killing. He was also disturbingly a necrophiliac, Bundy himself mentioned. Murder was not about lust or violence. It's about possession and looking into a woman's eyes in the last seconds before her death is like being God. He never experienced any guilt whatsoever by killing them, clearly a man without a soul. When a psychological test was performed on Ted to test his level of psychopathy, Ted Bundy ranked 39 out of 40 for true psychopath. Theodore Robert Bundy is a special kind of evil that no one should ever encounter in a dark alley. The only person that ever missed that man after his death was his mother. Much is said about Theodore Robert Bundy, but like with all serial murderers, we tend to forget about the victims. So this video is dedicated to all the beautiful women and girls that lost their lives in the prime of their life at the hands of this diabolical monster. Let these young women be remembered, granting them their rightful place in history and honoring their memory as a life lost far too soon. From Anne-Marie Burr to Kimberly Leach, may you all rest in eternal peace. Theodore Robert Bundy is one of the longest videos I've ever done, and hopefully it will be the last. But hopefully Notorious Minds has revealed something about this predator that was never revealed before, and if not hopefully, you enjoyed the video anyway. Thanks for watching. The Life of Theodore Robert Bundy, a Diabolical Predator. This is Notorious Minds, and I am M.R. Parks. Please like and share, and by all means subscribe to this channel. Have a good day. See you next time.